A little over 1 month ago, the Golden State Warriors traded for Jimmy Butler, and so far the results could not be much better.
I mean, y'all know who he is and what he's been able to do in this league. And there's a learning curve and a learning process to bringing in a guy like him, but he's a superstar.
Jimmy looks every bit the Jimmy that we have seen over the last few years, and same can be said for Stephen Curry. The Dubs have gone 8-1 with Jimmy Butler on the squad, and as of now, they are the number 2 defense in the league and the number 3 offense ever since this deal has gone down. But how much does this early success tell us from a long-term point of view? Is this merely a hot start, the honeymoon phase, and things will eventually work out to be much worse? Or are the Dubs right back in the driving seat towards contention in the Western Conference? Let's talk about it. Hello everybody, welcome to Rusty Buckets. Subscribe to the channel and drop a like, and check us out over on Spotify and Apple Podcasts if you would like to enjoy this as an audio-only experience. Also, go ahead and check out our third channel, Little Rusty Buckets, where I've been posting smaller videos on smaller topics. Having a lot of fun over there, getting real loose with it. Go check that stuff out, would much appreciate it. Jimmy Butler, while his numbers have not been that substantial, he absolutely passes the eye test for me. In many ways, this is similar to how I feel about, Luka Doncic so far in LA. Stats don't look good, but if you actually are watching these games, you can very clearly see why this is working and why it will continue to work. His defense, Jimmy I'm referring to now, has been elite. The offense has benefited a lot from having his playmaking presence, specifically his scoring gravity, not just the ability to make the right pass, but the ability to make the defense shift and have to adjust to his presence. Not a lot of guys on this roster are doing that besides for Steph until we add Jimmy to the fold. A huge thing is that he gets to the line, which the Golden State Warriors have never really had. There has never really been a guy on this team who is just so good at getting free shots at the rim. They're called motherfucking free throws for a reason. The Dubs have never had access to that quality of offense so consistently, and it makes a huge difference. His numbers with the Warriors are by no means up to his standards, but they aren't terrible. Besides for the 3-point percentage, because Jesus Christ, that's bad. So far, those stats are 14.5 points, 4.9 assists, 4.9 rebounds on 43% shooting, 11.8% from 3. Yes, 11.8. And 88% from the line on just under 7 free throw attempts per night. Like I said, this is not stellar, but when Butler is on, man, can you see this working at the highest level. Steph has been bonkers since this edition. He is having a genuine resurgence out after falling out of the top 10 conversation. He is right back in it. In my personal opinion, he's still a top 10 player, even if he hasn't been a top 10 performer this season, if you get what I'm saying. Since the Butler deal, he's averaging 29.5 points, 6.6 assists, and he is shooting 42% from 3 on 12.5 attempts per game. He has an overall true shooting percentage since the Butler deal of 69%. Nice. If Jimmy is Jimmy and Steph is Steph, which I think is very reasonable to expect because Jimmy truly, just from an eye test perspective, looks just as healthy and capable and athletic as he has his last couple of seasons. If those guys are those guys, everybody should be worried about this team in the Western Conference and beyond it if they were to potentially make it out. As I mentioned in the intro, the role players have been liberated. Since this deal, Pods is averaging 13 points per game, up from the 9 he averaged before. His 3-point shooting percentage has been rough at just about 29% on 5.5 attempts, but the games that I have watched, he's gotten a lot of very clean looks consistently, and he's definitely not a terrible shooter. So I just think this is a product of the shots not simply going in, and if anything, I would expect an even larger leap from Pods as the season goes along. Fucking wild, though, that Steve Kerr wanted this motherfucker to shoot 12 threes a game going into the year. Moses Moody, in particular, has stood out to me. He has gone up from 9 points per game to averaging 12, solid splits across the board. I've really liked his presence and aggressiveness attacking off of the catch in these games. Quentin Post is somebody that I had not even heard of before this. He had only played a couple of games with the Dubs before, so there's not much like comparing and contrasting here, but he has been fucking awesome. In 17 minutes per game, he is averaging 10 points and 4 rebounds while shooting 49% from 3. He is a legit shooting big, one of the best shooting bigs in the NBA, frankly. There's a lot of doubters with him because his defense is so-so, doesn't move his feet super well, doesn't have a lot to contribute offensively besides for the three-point shooting, and, you know, he's not like a crazy strong rebounder by any means, but I honestly think that his shooting, if it holds up as well as it has been, they can be good enough defensively with him on the floor because of Draymond Green and his ability to play the small ball 5, his ability to be just a really effective help side rim protector. Given that Draymond has that aspect to his game, I think that Post's offensive upside could have its value for decent stretches. Obviously, it depends how much the team you are dealing with is mismatch hunting, how effectively they get those mismatches, how effectively they attack them, how well Quentin holds up in those situations. So he could get played off the floor for that reason, but I do think at least situationally, we should still see a good amount of Quentin Post in the postseason. Gary Payton has also seen a huge leap in efficiency, going from 5 points per game in 13 minutes a night to 7.3, while shooting 61% from the field and 33% from 3, which for him is unfortunately a pretty good stretch. On a slight negative side of things, Draymond is shooting 19% from 3, which that's not what you want. As I mentioned when this deal went down, my biggest concern was Draymond's floor spacing and how well that would maintain, because he has actually shot the 3 pretty well over the last 2 seasons, but there's a difference between being a legitimately good shooter and just being a guy who shoots a decent percentage with the defense just entirely disrespecting you as a shooter. Like, truly couldn't give less of a fuck about Draymond on the perimeter. When you have that situation going on, kind of hard to deal with that spacing negative, even if you have all the playmaking in the world between him, Jimmy, and Steph. But what I do think is super positive about all of this is I don't really have anything else to criticize with the offense. Since this deal, the Dubs are the 3rd best offense in the league, and what I think is super encouraging about that, and I think this is something that needs to be highlighted more than it has been just from the people who I've seen talking about this team. Nobody, and I mean nobody, besides for Steph and Quentin Post, has shot the 3 super well since this deal has gone down. As a whole, the team is at just 34% from 3 since the Butler deal, which is right around league average. It would rank them 16th in percentage over this stretch. 16th in three-point percentage as a high-volume three-point shooting team, and yet they are still 3rd in offensive rating. And you want to know what that is? They are so consistently generating good looks and easy scoring opportunities because everybody is a good playmaker and there's slashing happening. There's the defense collapsing in on itself happening. And that is just opening up the floor in a way that the Warriors have not seen since 2022 and arguably even earlier than that. Because they're getting a good shot every fucking possession, because they're getting free opportunities for free throws because Jimmy Butler is drawing these fouls, because they're getting more paint opportunities because Jimmy Butler is a slasher, because of the scoring gravity aspect that Jimmy brings to the table. There's also more openings to the rim. I remember a play from his first game where the set was clearly like a trick play where you would think Jimmy Butler is the one cutting and Pods is the one popping off of a screen, but instead Pods cut inside and got a layup. And like those backdoor opportunities, the Warriors have always done that, but it seems even more open for them now than it already was. In games where the Dubs have shot the 3-ball well, they have looked pretty insane. In the games post-trade, where they shot 37% or higher, they win by an average of 17 points per game. Then you factor in that they're also, a kick-ass fucking defense. Now, the Dubs were a good defense before this deal. Don't get me wrong. It is mostly the offensive upside that has mattered the most from this deal, but because of the rejuvenation that has been associated with this trade, it also feels like they've just stepped up on that end as well. There's a lot to be said for how a new trade, a new star in town, can breathe a new life into the team. We're very much seeing that happen with Luka and the Lakers. I think he's affected LeBron positively in that way. And Draymond, you know, I think he's been getting more spotlight as a defensive anchor lately because of how good they've been. But honestly, he kind of just always does this. Like, one thing about the Warriors is they're going to play good defense as long as Draymond's healthy. They always play good defense as long as Draymond is healthy. And I think that consistency is often overlooked because defense is just often overlooked anyways. And the ebbs and flows of the Warriors over the last few years has pretty much been determined entirely by their offense. Draymond Green's regression as a three-point shooter after his first couple of seasons and regression as a scorer in general is something that is often highlighted as a big catalyst in that. So much of the focus from the media ends up being on Draymond's negative offensive attributes and then also just the other ridiculous shit he says or does, which that stuff's all reasonable. Draymond has just been doing this the whole time. He's just one of the best defensive anchors who has ever played this game. He's so good. He's such a good defensive anchor. And I think people will grow to respect him more when his career is over. He's definitely done a lot of damage to his own career with his own bullshit, but he is one of the best defenders of all time, and he's still doing it even as he is getting gray in his beard. You just get the sense that this deal woke everybody the fuck up, and the Dubs defense is just fully juiced. Like, it really just feels like there's a whole new energy around this team, which you could argue is maybe a little bit of a reductive way of looking at these things. Like, such a vibey, spiritual way of looking at the game. You don't need to be friends to win championships. You don't need everyone to be happy to win championships. But honestly, this shit does matter. The vibes are immaculate for a team that was actively depressing as fuck to watch 5 weeks ago. I found it very hard to watch the Dubs this year because Steph wasn't Steph, and the rest of the team fucking sucked. It was mismanaged, coached poorly, like across the board. Just so many things upsetting about that team. And then now, everybody's happy and feeling good about playing basketball again for the first time in quite a while. And you might not need to be friends to win championships. You might not need good vibes to win championships. Kobe and Shaq did it without that being the case, once or twice. But it certainly helps. More championship teams than not are teams with very, very good camaraderie. It makes a real difference because it actually gets people actively playing for each other instead of their own interest. A lot of the people on the Dubs didn't really feel like they had much opportunity to contend for anything, so they're going to play for their own numbers to make sure that they have a job next year. And they're playing unselfishly. They're playing for each other. Now that there's Butler, like, this is such a remarkable step up for such a cheap trade package. The Dubs have managed to have their cake and eat it too with this deal. The Dubs have given Steph his second creator, freed him up more with that, made Steph better, and liberated him to play like he's in his prime. But they still have the young players that they've been insistent on not trading for years. Now that Butler is there, guys like Pods and Heald don't have to be shot creators. I mean, they still sometimes do have them do that, mostly because Steve Kerr is oftentimes a baffling head coach, even if he is one of the greatest of all time. But nevertheless, there's good things happening for everybody on the squad. I view them as a true contender. I don't have any ounce of hesitation with this. I don't even feel like it's a hot take. It's only a hot take because the Warriors were so fucking bad and depressing before this. But truly, this roster, top to bottom, is great. Steph, Jimmy, and Draymond as your three best players, surrounded by catch and shoot guys, surrounded by guys who can attack off of the catch. Like, it is just as good as it could be off of one trade where you gave up one key rotation piece and 3 first-round picks, like 2 of them that weren't even your own. Like, oh my God, what a good trade this has been. I think there's a strong argument that they are the NBA's true fourth contender. I've had a lot of struggles with that. Really figuring out who the fourth contender is also just figuring out who the second best team in the West is, because that's very much up in the air. Like, you could see it going to the Lakers, the Nuggets, the Dubs, maybe even the Grizzlies if Ja turns it on in time for the postseason. But all of that said, I really think the Dubs have a super strong case. I need to see what the Lakers look like with Luka as Luka for a prolonged period of time. Like, if Luka gets in shape and I see that happening while LeBron's doing what he's doing, while Austin Reeves is doing what he's doing, I'll probably feel like they're a little bit better than the Dubs. But if Luka's not really quite getting into form this year, if LeBron maybe slows down a little bit, Austin Reeves maybe slows down a little bit, or injury or two happens there, I think the Warriors have a very real shot of being the only team in the West that can really, really, really hang with OKC. I would still ultimately choose OKC to win it. I don't think they're beating them. I don't think anyone's beating them. But if you do manage to get playoff Jimmy and Steph at the same time, who knows how likely it is that all aligns perfectly. But if you manage to get, like, combined, they're averaging 50 points and 15 assists on good shooting splits. The role players are hitting their catch and shoot threes while the defense is completely locked in. Like, is that not a terrifying picture to you if you're a Western Conference contender? Does that not ring as unbeatable? Because it does to me. It really reads as very unbeatable. And, like, literally, I don't even think that the odds that those stars align perfectly are that low. Like, it's not that crazy. The odds aren't that high because stars don't align very often, but they are not non-existent. They are big enough that they are worthy of significant consideration. And these odds, the odds that they might just be my championship dark horse by the time we get to the postseason. Obviously, if they're the second best team in the West, dark horse is maybe not a fair description, but the conversation for championship this year has been so heavily carried by three teams, the Celtics, the Cavs, and the Thunder. So I think any team that's not those three is essentially a dark horse. And if that logic holds, then yes, the Warriors are my dark horse to win a championship. Great trade, just a great fucking deal. Did they maybe wait too long? Absolutely. But I said that this deal would more likely be the nail in the coffin for this dynasty than it would be something that uplifts them. The Jimmy Butler cycle exists. We've seen the Jimmy Butler cycle where he's great, has a honeymoon period with the team, and then it kind of wears off. So there's a possibility that we do get that. And not much that you can do if that's what happens, but I think that they could compete for a championship over the next 3 seasons, including this one. Jimmy could just fall off a fucking cliff one year because he's older. Same can be said for Steph. But if these guys age relatively well, they have a couple of good off seasons in there, the possibility of Steph and Draymond and Steve Kerr getting their 5th ring is very real. It's very, very real. All right, that is it. Thank you so much for watching. Goodbye.